Welcome, everyone. Another Financial 15, going back to one of our most popular topics, retirement. Now, often folks think retirement, it's a circle it on the calendar. You get to the date, you cross it off, and that's it. Not the case, Kevin. It's more of a process than an event, and we're going to cover all those details today. So you definitely want to stick around.
Yes, waking up, I'm off to the beach, last day of work, retirement's here. Now, if you want to find out anything along these lines that we're going to talk about, or any of the other Financial 15 videos we've done, please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. It's quick, it's simple, great content on there, and a variety of different topics for you to take a look at. Also, please like us on Facebook, and if you can, please visit our website at beckerorr.com. We have blogs, we have events that are coming up, webinars, the whole 9 yards. You've got great stuff that you can see, and that will help you out going forward. But today, we are dealing with retirement as a process. It's not an event, right? You don't just say, hey, it's my last day of work. Now I'm retired. Everything's going to be perfect. I don't have to worry about anything again, do it. It's more of an ongoing scenario.
Like a grocery list, Kevin. It's on the list. Got to get apples, retire, and then you cross them off and you're done.
Yes.
Yeah, but I can understand how people get into that mindset. One is financial companies market it that way. I mean, often there's people on the dock fishing, they're at the cottage, and it's kind of marketed as you get to this date and then life's grand, but don't worry about that part. You just have to get to that date. So the advertising leads us down that path, and things have changed. There was a time, rewind a few decades, where folks had defined benefit pension plans. There's been other videos explaining those, so we'll link to that video, but where you essentially work for a company for 30 years and then you get a pension that have guaranteed income for the rest of your retirement. So you didn't have to worry too much about the other parts. It could really be an event mindset, right? You circle the date, you get there, you retire, your pension kicks in, and that's it. Now, there's likely a lot more planning that still has to go there for taxes and estates, so it's still argued to be a little bit of a process involved, but I can understand how someone would think that if that were the case, but unfortunately no longer the reality, right, Kevin?
No, I mean, exactly. I mean, we're down to a few defined benefit plans. Basically, if you're a government employee, you may have one of these, but the rest of the world basically has gone away from that. Whether you have a pension plan at all is one, or if not, it's probably more defined contribution, as we've discussed these two plans and how they differentiate for things going forward. But yeah, nowadays, a lot more money that you have to put away depending on what you want to do with retirement. And also, the other factors are that, you're living longer. When are you retiring? What kind of scenarios do you do? Maybe you used to work to 65 and you'd have 10, 15 years. That was great. Now, if you're retired at 55 or 60 because of things, you're going to have money to be able to deal with. And this is not just, I hit retirement, everything's there. You have to plan for how you're going to deal with retirement. What are my goals here? Do I have that plan going forward? So again, it's not something that you can just say, hey, I'm going to throw my hands up. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to enjoy the good life completely. You're going to have to maintain going forward as to, this is something that I have to look at. What am I doing this year? What am I doing next year? What am I doing next month? I'm planning it from there.
Yeah, so I understand how people can get into that event framework and kind of the factors, but lots has changed. So let's look at a little bit of data and work our way through this here, Kevin. Some of the data. When do folks retire in Canada? Well, according to Statistics Canada, 65 essentially is the answer. 64.6 is the average figure there. Then they break it down. If you're in the public sector, you might retire a little earlier. They have an average age there of 62.7. Private sector a little later, and even later would be self-employed individuals. The average there at 68.6. But if you said 65 for Canadians when they retire, I think that's a pretty good ballpark. In general, according to the stats, that's when most folks would be retiring, give or take a few years either side. So if that's when we retire, and I'm going to build up to a few factors here. We answer the first part, when we retire. The second part, Kevin, we have to figure out is, well, how long do we live to give us an idea of retirement? You can see all the data here in this table.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. The older we get, of course, the way that the charts work, you will probably live longer. So if you manage to make it to 65, chances are you're going to live another 20 years, which means you have to plan for that entire 20 years. And then if you do make it to, say, 80, chances are you can live another 10 years beyond that. So now you're up to 90. So now you're 25 years into this whole scenario. So again, Canadians are living longer and longer than even 30 years ago or even 15 years ago. So the longer you live, of course, you have to plan for this. This is not, as we say, it's not an event where I'm retired and good. I'm good for the rest of my life. You have to plan for, what is my possibility for how long I'm going to live? If it's 20 years, I got to plan for 20 years. But if I make that 20 years, then do I have another 10 years left in me? So this is an event that you constantly are updating and looking at going forward. So again, you want to make sure that you have yourself well put together so that you can or look for these long life expectancies that you're going to have as you move forward.
Yeah, and you really hit on the point there. The idea if we retire in our 60s, 65 generally in Canada, then we live for, another 20 years, which according to Statistics Canada is not out of the norm. In fact, that is
No.
kind of in line. If you're a healthy 65-year-old in Canada, there's a good chance you make it until your 80s. Well, you need to plan for a couple of decades of retirement. So it's not an event, very much a process. And then one more point, we're hitting on a couple here that are just kind of defining how this is more of a process than just a one and done event. We talked about when we retire, talked about how long we tend to live. Another part, and this is quoting a different study, but that often retirees don't spend all the savings in retirement. Now, this is a study done by the Employee Benefit Research Institute, EBRI. We'll link to a video we did on that one. But essentially, the idea here is often folks still have some of their savings left over when they do eventually pass a few decades later. And that makes some sense. Often folks are planning for the next generation, right? There's an estate component involved in there, often a tax component, part of that overall planning idea, which means, again, it's more of a process than an event. If you're not spending all the money and you're thinking about the estate, that all kind of links back to having to have a plan for the overall process. So less of an exciting event where we celebrate, yay, retirement, done, cross it off the list, more of an ongoing process that takes place.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the psychological barrier scenario that's going on, and the fact that you've saved for the entire time frame to get you to that point where you want to retire. Watching those savings deteriorate is not something anybody likes to do. So maybe you're cutting back on things that you don't plan to because I got to make sure that I have more money for the next year and things along those lines that I want to be able to deal with. So I mean, these are all coordinated into what I want to do. You don't just switch your lifestyle because they're retired. Now I can do all the travel and everything else that I want. And, if I travel this year and I travel next year, 15 years down the road, I'm not going to travel, so I don't have to worry about it. But yeah, those are options that we may have to look at. So you're right. Retirement is not just a one and done deal. As you mentioned, it's not crossed off the grocery list. And then I can move on to item number 2. It is something that you have to look for. And again, some of these psychological barriers and everything else that we have are going to create that as you're reviewing it yearly and seeing to make sure that you're still on track with everything that you want to do for that 20 years.
Exactly. And then we'll get into people might be thinking, all right, I get it. It's a process, but what's wrong with treating it like an event anyway? And that's really the crux of the video here, is saying if you use that event style framework, it tends to shorten your time horizon, and that can lead to some bad decisions around your financial plan. So if you treat it more like an event, at least in our terminology here of an event, it's crossing off the to list, it's done. Well, you might be thinking quite short term, not really fully grasping the 20 or maybe 30 years that you could end up being retired. And maybe you're spending a little too much early on, or maybe you focus very much on a strategy for taxes that'll work for the next year, but could have ramifications 5 or 10 years down the road. Or you do the same thing with your investments, getting really focused on the return for next month or next year, and not really appreciating that you have a 2-decade long horizon, and 1 month, 1 year within that 2-decade span won't be the end of the world. So that type of shorter term horizon is linked often to that event mentality, that event framework. And if you don't fully appreciate that, you can end up knocking your retirement off track by the type of decisions you make with the wrong time horizon in mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what you hit the nail on the head, is the fact that sometimes you can't deal with it as a short-term time frame. I mean, you can't plan everything for, I've got to get this done this year, this done this year, this done this year. And, I can do all this till I'm 70, and then I'm going to pull back and do everything from there. Because again, if you've overspent in the beginning, there may not be enough there after the ending. There may be bad markets that come into that time frame. There may be other odds and ends that go along, or you may have an unexpected event that goes on, whether it's an illness or a health-related issue. All things that can't be expected. And if you don't make the right decisions in the short term, then that could affect you in the long term.
Yeah, so it's really getting a good idea of that time horizon to make sure you don't end up making a short-term decision that impacts the long term, because retirement is a process. It is for a long term. I think this leads us, Kevin, to what everyone is probably waiting for at this point, is the Becker Orr motto, is you really need to have a plan that'll encapsulate your needs, what you're trying to achieve in retirement, and really look at that longer term horizon to make sure everything is going to line up, that all the pieces are actually going to come together as expected.
Yeah, because you've hit it again. That's exactly it. It's our motto. It's our mantra. It's everything else. Having that plan is really important, because as we mentioned, it's not an event. For an event, you can just sit there and this is the day it's going to happen. Having that plan is something so that you have that retirement process in effect, so that you will have the retirement that you want, as opposed to things not going correctly the same way because you didn't have all your aspects in order.
Exactly. So if you have more questions, whether it's on this topic or any other topic, I'd love to hear from you. You can always go to chatwithclintonandkevin.com. That's part of our website. Fill in the form. It comes right to us. We'll get back to you as fast as we can. Chatwithclintonandkevin.com. Would love to hear from you. Any parting comments for the folks, Kevin?
No, I just think that now that we've covered it, remember everyone, it's not an event. It is a process and it takes a while. By all means, consult us. We're more than happy to walk you through the retirement process going forward.
Good place to end it. Take care, everyone.